The world of wrestling is filled with rivalries that transcend eras. Some encounters happen when a superstar is no longer in their prime. Others happen during the infancy of each challenger's career. Then there are a series of classic battles that happen when both wrestlers are firing on all cylinders. This is Rivalry Revisited, Taker vs. Shawn. The Undertaker is a character that, in the hands of anyone but Mark Calaway, could have become a hokey gimmick. When considering some of Calaway's fellow colleagues, the Undertaker's story could have been comparable to a trash man, a circus clown, a hockey player, or
"So you're the man that rules the world. They call me the Shockmaster."
Instead, the Dead Man's gimmick took inspiration from John Carpenter's 1978 film Halloween and the main antagonist, Michael Myers. A character that appeared to be a man, there was something evil that made him much more. Over the years, the wrestling industry would evolve, and so did The Undertaker. Speaking of evolution, there might not be a better two-part story than that of Shawn Michaels. Considered one of the most innovative superstars in WWE history, it is impossible to go through 90s wrestling highlights without seeing HBK all over it. The two ladder matches with Razor Ramon, along with the bell-to-bell classic at WrestleMania 12, cemented that Shawn was a bona fide main eventer. But it might be his second run that solidified him as one of the all-time greats. It is difficult for me to jump into this rivalry without starting with the first ever Hell in a Cell match in 1997. Tension was rising high from SummerSlam when Shawn, as the special guest referee, would accidentally strike The Undertaker with a chair, which would secure a WWE Championship win for Bret Hart. What started out as a complete accident, the SummerSlam chair shot would be the first domino to fall in a Michaels heel turn. A combination of promos blaming the fans, along with a series of attacks on the Dead Man, would lead us to Bad Blood 97 and the first iteration of the satanic structure known as Hell in a Cell. You could tell in the pre-match build that Hell in a Cell was designed to fill the gaps that a regular cage match left behind. For one, the traditional four-sided steel structure could be escaped. The second being that while not impossible, it was difficult to incorporate weapons without access to the outside of the ring. Finally, the cell itself dwarfed its predecessor, not only allowing more freedom, but the ability to tell a more elaborate story. Michaels' backstage confidence quickly disappeared when the cell lowered and The Undertaker made his entrance. The early going was a one-sided ass-kicking. The storytelling was not hard to pick up on. Taker wanted revenge on Shawn. Shawn wanted to avoid Taker, yet there was no place to run. After an early match beatdown, the Heartbreak Kid would swing the momentum in his direction. A lot of Michaels' offense came from his surroundings. Stairs, chairs, and an aerial attack. The most creative wrinkle to the match was when Shawn gets flung over the top rope onto the cameraman, and Michaels, in true heel fashion, takes his frustration out on this innocent bystander. With an injured non-competitor ringside, the locked door needed to be open, which this would be the excuse required for both superstars to leave the demonic structure. Outside of the cell, all the striking favored The Undertaker as the no-holds-barred contest turned more into a street fight. After a sequence on the roof of the cell, there would be a fun table spot that would prove to be the highlight of the contest. Eventually, after re-entering the cell, Taker would strike Shawn and signal for the end, but then the lights would go out. The long-awaited debut of Undertaker's younger brother Kane, which would lead to an incredible visual. After ripping off a gimmick door, Kane would enter the ring, uses pyro for the first time, and plant the Dead Man with his own finisher. Whatever was left of Shawn Michaels crawled onto The Undertaker for the win. Bad Blood 97 was extremely memorable, considering it was a lily pad for Shawn vs. Bret at Survivor Series, and eventually Kane vs. Undertaker at WrestleMania the following year. Royal Rumble 1998 saw a casket match between the two men that would see a scary bump where Michaels would injure his back. The next couple months were designed just to get Shawn to WrestleMania 14, where he could then drop the championship to Stone Cold Steve Austin. Once the deed was done, Shawn would enter retirement due to the severity of the previously mentioned back injury. In the 4 years while Shawn was gone, The Undertaker would have a series of character changes to keep with the times. In the coming years, we would see the return of Michaels, as the Heartbreak Kid looked like he never lost a step. Also during this time, The Undertaker kept winning at WrestleMania until finally at the 21st edition of the Granddaddy of Them All, a storyline was built around the Dead Man streak. 2007 at the Royal Rumble, we would see the closing sequence be determined by these two icons, A big moment and resume builder for sure, but there's something more definitive about pinning another superstar's shoulders to the mat for a 3 count. Fast forward to 2009 and WrestleMania 25. With Undertaker's undefeated streak at 16, a date with the Dead Man at the Showcase of Immortals started to become just as big or even bigger than World Championship bouts. With the reputation of being Mr. WrestleMania, and the honor of retiring Ric Flair the year prior, it was only inevitable for these two titans to meet at the biggest event of the year. The build to the first WrestleMania Classic between these two legends saw the light vs. dark angle used to represent HBK's Christianity and The Undertaker's, past of forcibly making his opponents rest in peace. What was interesting was Shawn's ability to play mind games with The Undertaker. The psychological edge has always gone to Taker, which is what made Michaels' one-upsmanship so noteworthy. Another note of mention was that Undertaker had never beaten Shawn Michaels in a one-on-one match. As the holder of the streak entered the ring for the WrestleMania 25 clash, unlike Bad Blood, Michaels was not intimidated. This go-around had a different vibe. In the early stages of the contest, Shawn's mind games would continue. The combination of the agility discrepancy and Michaels' taunting of The Undertaker had the Dead Man rattled in the early going. In the Hell in a Cell encounter between the two almost 12 years prior, Shawn had to use so much of his surroundings to gain the upper hand on Taker because his offense did not look as believable on its own. This time, Michaels was incorporating knife-edge chops that were echoing throughout the arena. The chops were an added offensive weapon that gave an element of believability that most small men versus big men matches are missing. If you can't hurt your opponent with strikes, how am I expected to believe that you can beat them? All that said, Taker had an obvious power advantage. There were moments in the match where Michaels would have a series of offense stifled by one clubbing blow by the Dead Man. A major sequence was back-to-back missed high spots. The first one by Shawn, followed by the scary cameraman bump where Taker appeared to land directly on his head. To think, this all-time classic was almost cut short. After the action resumed, the story was about how each man would find a way to counter the other man. The most iconic moment might have been when Michaels went to pull himself back into the ring, but was intercepted by The Undertaker and a tombstone piledriver was delivered. But Shawn kicked out, much to the surprise of the live crowd. The look on Taker's face told the whole story. It just wasn't Shawn absorbing his opponent's best shot. Undertaker kicked out of a second Sweet Chin Music. Both men went on to sell the war they were in, having a staggered slugfest. Finally, this WrestleMania Classic would reach its conclusion when Michaels would be caught on a moonsault attempt, and a second tombstone would be delivered. Reviewing this match, it would be easy to point out the number of false finishes, but that does not tell the full story. Both superstars had 40+ years of combined wrestling experience, so it would make sense that two high-level veterans would be capable of countering most moves. Pacing, selling, and the shock and awe moments made this the go-to match for fans of both men. With the positive reviews from this contest of future Hall of Famers, backstage plans were set in place pretty early for a WrestleMania rematch. But if WrestleMania 25 was a high-level example of professional wrestling, then Mania 26 was the ultimate display of sports entertainment. The first hint at Michaels vs. Taker Round 2 was at the Slammies. Shawn accepted the award for Match of the Year, but before exiting, he paused and stepped back to the microphone.
You and me, WrestleMania, one more time.
Now the question became, would the Dead Man accept? The Undertaker was entering the new year as the World Heavyweight Champion, and in a few months would put his streak on the line against a worthy opponent. After beating Michaels the previous year, there wasn't an incentive to run it back for the Dead Man. In contrast, Shawn was desperate to get another crack at the unbeaten streak. When The Undertaker would decline Michaels' challenge at WrestleMania, this created a series of events that would put the showstopper's desperation on display. First, it would be a good run that would come up short in the Royal Rumble. This spiraled into a loss of focus in his matches, assaulting of WWE personnel, and then finally Shawn walking out claiming that his career was over. There was no way for Michaels to earn a shot at The Undertaker with him as champion. There's an obligation for title holders. But if the World Championship was out of the picture, then there was a chance. Elimination Chamber, the last hurdle before WrestleMania. It looked like Taker was just about to finish off Chris Jericho when HBK popped from a grate outside the ring and superkicked the reigning champ out of the title picture. In a Road to WrestleMania Raw, Michaels would offer a challenge at the grandest stage one more time, and this go-around, The Undertaker would accept. But there was a catch.
If I beat you, your career is over.
A babyface Undertaker might be the most popular entity in WrestleMania history. In the Mania 25 encounter, Shawn by no means was treated as a heel, but it was obvious that the majority of the WWE universe was rooting for the holder of the streak. What made 26 so interesting was this go-around, Shawn had something to lose. Something big to lose. The biggest rematch in WWE history was set. It was streak versus career. The start to the WrestleMania 26 encounter, which rightfully was in the main event, was similar to the one a year prior. Michaels used his agility to avoid Taker and go back to the well with the knife-edge chops. The streak is fascinating in the sense that so much of the chatter early on was how big it would be if The Undertaker's undefeated streak was ended on that night. It took until after the 4-minute mark for Jerry the King Lawler to remind his colleagues that as impressive as the streak was, one of the best to ever do its career was on the line. This illustrated two things. One, the streak became so big that it was the lead story over one of the best in-ring athletes of all time's career. But also, what King was saying was true. This created a dilemma for the live crowd on whether to root for an annual tradition or for a career to be extended. Only a couple minutes into the contest, Undertaker tweaked his knee, attempting his trademark move, Old School. This gave a form of adversity that the dead man would need to overcome if he were to extend the streak to 18-0. The cunning veteran that Michaels was, he would target the knee throughout the match. This is an element that does not get used enough in David vs. Goliath-esque encounters. The bigger performer is always going to have an advantage because of their power. So how do you even the odds? An injury. The meeting a year prior saw many counters for both men, and the rematch in Glendale was no exception. What I only picked up on rewatching both of these classics back to back was both legends made a conscious effort to counter different moves compared to the previous meeting, a big one being the flying elbow. Another added element was both men hitting significant maneuvers outside the ring, one in the first half of the match being a tombstone at ringside, and then later on a moonsault through an announce desk. In the end, multiple tombstone pile drivers in the center of the ring would keep the Heartbreak Kid down for the 3 count. The ending sequence to the match felt full circle from WrestleMania 24 when Michaels retired Flair, because right before the final nail, there was a visual, emotional hesitation. In the main event of 26 for the first time, Taker showed remorse, at one point begging Michaels to stay down. Shawn, not wanting the Undertaker's pity, would mock the dead man and follow it with a slap. This instigation was enough for Taker to finish the job and end the career of Shawn Michaels. WrestleMania 26 never had a chance to top 25 because of one simple factor: expectations. 25 scored an A+ when it came to grading the contest quality from counters to false finishes. Even the placement of the match was in the middle of the card. I thought 26 lived up to the hype, but the bar was just already set. The shock of kicking out of finishers was removed from the year prior. Where 26 excelled was the storytelling. When I look back on this rivalry, I think of two separate eras. The first era being from the 90s, where there was a series of matches between heel Shawn and face Taker, where Shawn always came on top, but it was a screwy finish. Most of these contests were the Undertaker kicking Michaels' ass, with Shawn getting in very little offense. Still, Hell in a Cell left a lot of really cool memories. Then there was the second era, the 2 WrestleMania matches that felt much more evenly contested compared to the encounters in the 90s. This is what happens when 2 of the best in-ring workers ever are still physically able to deliver in the ring, but also have so much experience that they're able to map out a classic. When it comes to stealing the show, one generation has Savage vs. Steamboat, the newer generation has HBK vs. the Dead Man. This is Rivalry Revisited, Taker vs. Shawn. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. To see more content like this in the future, make sure to click the subscribe button.